Our first speaker this morning will be Joe Weyl with ESRI. He's a senior solutions engineer at ESRI, and he'll be speaking with us about best practices and extending your ArcGIS enterprise system.
Good morning, everybody. Usually I don't need a microphone. I just have a voice that projects very loudly, but in a room this size, it's probably best that I have it. So I'd like to give you a little brief intro about who I am and why ESRI picked me to have this discussion with you all. I've only been with ESRI for just under a year now, but I spent the last 25 years developing and supporting large architectures for WebGIS systems. I did work for the EPA, North Carolina Flood Mapping Program, Health and Human Services, just to name a couple of those examples. But I spent the last 9 years working for AECOM, managing their ArcGIS enterprise. And that was quite an undertaking because it's a global system, very large amount of servers, and a lot of work that went behind that work in architecture. So when we talk about architecture of GIS, we have to remember that behind it, the core of it is the data. And the data makes all the difference in everything that we're doing, because if the data is bad, everything else is bad with it. But with that data, there's a lot of parts to it that make it more useful to everything that we're trying to do with our systems. And some of those things include not just the data themselves, but workload separation as part of that data management. And that's one of the best practices that I think is very important to what we're trying to do with our GIS system. And if you look at just on the screen, all the different data types that are on here, that's a lot of different data to try to maintain and manage and then expand with. So when we talk about the architecture of GIS, of ArcGIS as a system, we're really looking at it from the perspective, for most of us, from the user. We're using the system, we're trying to manage it, we're trying to make sure that we can put our deliverables out there, our web maps, our experience builder, our field map applications, whatever those things may be. So when you're looking at it, it's the GIS capabilities that really makes this work for you for what you're presenting as a visualization layer. But most of the time, we don't take into account, as GIS users, the other side of the equation, which is the IT infrastructure and the IT domains that manage it. And this is where your best practices from the IT side really help you be successful with your ArcGIS enterprise deployment. And when you're looking at that, there's a lot of different pieces in here: the infrastructure, security, the reliability. Those are all very important aspects to your success as an enterprise system. And actually, I do have one quick straw poll here to do. Who is using enterprise now? And are you using it with in the cloud, on-prem? Both? Okay. And then are you using ArcGIS Online as well? Okay. And I ask that because part of what I'm going to be discussing is how we extend enterprise with ArcGIS Online. So ArcGIS is actually an essential IT system when we think about it, because a lot of the work that goes into managing enterprise is coupled with IT, and it's part of the overall infrastructure. I mean, for example, at AECOM, I was hosting an environment that was serving 2,000 creators and 5,000 viewers globally. And that system needed to be up 24/7. And that was a lot of work to maintain that. And for a while, you know, you get to realize that the system needed a lot of IT help to be able to be successful in what you were doing. And when you look at all these different pieces of the technology, one thing about it is just that there's a lot of different pieces to it. Now, this is our support and presentation model for it being part of the system. And one of the things that's really going to be coming out soon that we're putting out is what we call the Weyl architected framework. It's something that you can work with your IT team to be able to talk to them about what does it mean to have ArcGIS Enterprise in your infrastructure? How do we communicate what our needs are to the IT team, and then make sure that we get those things delivered? And the IT folks don't always know what ArcGIS is. They just think it's another application, and we all know differently. So when we talk about ArcGIS Enterprise, we're going to start with the base deployment. And when you're looking at the base deployment, we're going to look at the components that make up that base deployment. So, obviously with ArcGIS Enterprise and a base deployment, we've got the web adapters, we've got Portal, we've got ArcGIS Server, we've got the ArcGIS Data Store. But in this red box here, I have a little highlighted piece that says Enterprise Geodatabases. And the reason why that's there is it's not really part of the base deployment, but it's another way that you can extend your ArcGIS Enterprise. And this is something that I'm going to go into a little bit more detail later on. I have it in here just because I know at the state and local level, it's something that's used a little bit more. At AECOM, it was kind of difficult for us to do that, or for me to do that back then for the GIS users, because it was not, the architecture was very difficult to be able to support that extra step. And in a little smaller environment, probably might be easier. So why ArcGIS Enterprise? Since a lot of people in here are using it, some of these answers, everything you need to deploy your GIS. It's got mapping and visualization, data management, other capabilities inside of it. Don't get distracted by this little video. It's just kind of showing people searching around ArcGIS Enterprise and finding their items. So ArcGIS Enterprise core functionality gives you all these other pieces to it, the visualization, the websites, and the rest that goes with it, which you already know about. But what I'm looking at is expanding that functionality. Once you've set up your base deployment the way that it needs to be, you can then expand it, sharing data in Enterprise, collaborating with ArcGIS Online, and adding specific server roles. So when you're adding ArcGIS Online as part of your deployment, you're sharing and collaborating between the two products. You're using your ArcGIS Enterprise to build data and some other pieces that you may want to share with ArcGIS Online. Maybe have public-private concepts in what you're doing between what's in Enterprise and collaboration with ArcGIS Online, and bringing that back across. One thing that I wanted to point out is that there is a new blog post that was put up, not that new, it was put up right after the user conference, but basically it's talking about the benefits of each product and how they can work together as a system, and how you don't have to think of them as we're either going to have ArcGIS Enterprise or we're going to use ArcGIS Online. They can work together to better support your overall ArcGIS Enterprise environment in general. So obviously we have common use patterns with ArcGIS Online, but one of the ones that we see at the state and local level is more of ArcGIS Online will be that public deployment. We won't use Enterprise necessarily for all the public pieces, but some people do. And of course that's what it's meant for. But sometimes you could take advantage of the scalability of ArcGIS Online and not put that load on your system with ArcGIS Enterprise. So your internal users have Enterprise to be able to do stuff, but the public can look at the ArcGIS Online. And sometimes these very high traffic, well-received applications, they can take advantage of the scaling of ArcGIS Online. It's harder to scale Enterprise on the fly, but ArcGIS Online can handle that. And your workflows can support both the public and private operations because of the fact that you can go back and forth between Enterprise and ArcGIS Online. And then your IT folks usually are happier because then there's less work for them. So obviously with Enterprise, it's on premise. You're responsible for managing it. The IT infrastructure, so networking, backups, customers, responsible for patching the system. So if you're not a GIS admin, that might be you have to work with IT to manage that part of it. There is actually a support document out there to help automate that, that talks about using a Python and time jobs to be able to patch your Enterprise system, so you can plan it out a little bit more. But then the other thing about ArcGIS Enterprise is that there's common deployment patterns with it, with PowerShell, Chef, Azure ARM templates, and AWS templates, and that helps kind of standardize what you're doing. I'm kind of a believer in being able to automate as much as you can, to not just in the administration side of your workflows, or not just in the presentation side, but your administration side of your workflows. So now I'm going to take a look at ArcGIS Enterprise with an enterprise geodatabase. And the first thing that is very important to understand when you're talking about adding enterprise geodatabases to your system is that when you look at this, the data store is not a replacement for your enterprise geodatabase. The data store is what we call a system managed database. So that's obviously for what you're publishing to your portal, and it allows you to use your hosted feature layers and the content that goes inside of it. You've got your portal databases inside the portal itself, but then you also have the data store that's managing that data underneath. But the user managed data store, and the concept here is a small D and a small S for when you're saying data store. Ours is the capital D, capital S. You can use enterprise geodatabases, you can use cloud storage, you can use file systems, you can add other things to your enterprise, but we're going to focus a little bit more on enterprise geodatabases here because I think that's more of a common use pattern in what we're looking at. So obviously data is key, like I mentioned earlier. So with using an enterprise geodatabases, you have all the functionality of an enterprise geodatabase in your portal. And then you have some of these other pieces like traditional versioning and branch versioning, attribute rules. And then some of the tools inside enterprise can only be used with enterprise geodatabases on the back end, like Parcel Fabric and Utility Network. Those don't work in the data store. They have to work in an enterprise geodatabase. And so when you're looking at using those data management solutions inside of what you're doing, you need to have an enterprise geodatabase connected. The other good thing about using enterprise geodatabases is that you remove the direct connect of a user to the database because they go to enterprise, and then you take out that layer of management a little bit because you've got separation. You're not having users having to use a direct connect from ArcGIS Pro to the database. And it helps with user management too. I can imagine larger agencies having trouble having 100 SQL Server logins to manage GIS data, but if the data is already attached to enterprise, you don't have to worry about that because then the users can get assigned it inside enterprise. Now, when we're shifting from the enterprise geodatabase side of things and getting to some more advanced capabilities, there's a lot of different specialized server roles that we support. And we recommend with those server roles, obviously separating the workload. So image server, geo analytics, which Suzanne talked a little bit about yesterday, geo event server, notebook server, workflow manager. I've used notebook server and geo event in my past, and I really liked having notebook server available. We had a lot of use of that to be able to support scripting practices that where people needed to be able to automate what they were doing, and the notebook server allowed us to do that. But I'm going to focus a little bit more on image server and workflow manager for this talk. So when we're looking at, what does image server being federated with your enterprise look like? So now we've gone from that architectural concept of just having the portal server and the data store and the web adapters. Now we're adding a web adapter for the imagery and for image server. And so you see how this system can start growing, and these are all separate, in my mind, virtual machines supporting your enterprise. So there's another concept with the image server that's important to understand, is that you can do image server a couple of different ways depending on your workflows. Image server can be an image hosting server, like I have in the top left picture, but it also can be a raster analytics and dynamic imagery server where you have multiple servers supporting that. And then you can add the distributed raster store to what you're doing. And then you're having set workload separation, and you're scaling the functionality that you're adding to your ArcGIS enterprise environment. And when we look at that, the amount of data that imagery has now and all the different data sources that are out there, it's really important to understand all these different capabilities and how they can extend what you're doing with the enterprise. There's a lot of data sources here. Some of them I have never, in 30 years of working in GIS, never touched. So they're all new to me. So I understand, like, when, you know, when I set it up in the past, I've added image server, and we used image server for doing some of our image, just serving that out. But we also supported some image analytics inside the environment. So I had in the past, I had this bottom right picture in what I was supporting. So obviously, when you look at adding image server to your environment, you're adding a lot of extra capabilities. But now we're going to take a little shift from imagery and look at Workflow Manager and some of the capabilities that it offers to you. So when you add Workflow Manager, you see now we're adding another server, another web adapter to what we're doing. And the system is growing with everything in it. But Workflow Manager gives you extra capabilities to manage your workflows. Pretty straightforward. But why is that important? Why does it matter to you in what you're doing? Well, think of the idea of making a lot of data edits in your version geodatabase, and then you submit those for review. There's some QA/QC improvements that come back from it. Somebody needs to approve your changes and then mark them as complete. But meanwhile, in this workflow, there's a system tracking everything that you're doing so that you know where it stands in the workflow. How many times in the past would you go in and try to say, hey, did somebody edit that? I mean, I remember from personal experience when I was working in floodplain mapping, you know, going to edit some data and be like, hey, did you do this panel? Wait, I thought I had this panel. Wait. Workflow Manager helps you manage that aspect of it and get away from that part. So you know you have a standardized process to be able to deliver your data at the end. So the benefits of Workflow Manager include improved data quality. The productivity aspect of it alone, I think, is great because, you know, if you have a large amount of editing, it's very helpful to be able to have that QA/QC. You know, you're reducing a lot of risk, and it is overall that geographic approach to your work. And you can see from this slide here, there's a lot of different types of use cases for using Workflow Manager. I think that what this gives us, especially with inspections, asset management, you know, using things like the utility network, parcel fabric, and the location, the linear referencing networks, and some other parts to it. It gives you those extra steps to know that what you're getting is going to work for what you're doing. I mean, think about how much time, energy, and money would be lost if field work didn't have a way to you know, have some QA/QC in it, or you didn't have a way to check to make sure that everything was done to specs that you needed. And then, you know, at least Workflow Manager gives you a way to check that. Now, obviously, the system is growing in what we're doing. So it's very important when you look at the number of systems that you're adding to this overall architecture to have a way to manage it and monitor it. So ArcGIS Monitor gives you, now it's 2023.2 now. This is one thing I forgot to fix. And so the latest version, but ArcGIS Monitor obviously is another way to help you manage your overall system. It does things like manage, you can go in and look at your, if you're having problems with a specific feature service, if you're having problems with a map service, you can manage your databases, your geodatabases. You can manage the Windows system or Linux system that you're working with, whatever it is, using ArcGIS Monitor. And that really helps you kind of narrow down when there's a problem, a bottleneck. You don't know if there's, you know, something else going on. You know, in the past for me, I've had users call me and be like, "Oh, Joe, something's going on with enterprise. It's working really slow. I can't get this one map service to work. Well, I would go over to ArcGIS Monitor. I'd find that map service and I'd see what the metrics were on it and help me figure that out. Now, ArcGIS Monitor, it manages a lot of information across your enterprise. And when I look at using Monitor as just one more tool to understand the big picture of the enterprise system. Now, obviously, you can't manage ArcGIS Online with it, but everything in your environment, so whether it's in the cloud or whether it's on-prem, you can use ArcGIS Monitor to manage it. And the one nice thing about ArcGIS Monitor, ArcGIS Monitor is that you can manage ArcGIS Monitor across multiple environments. So you can use ArcGIS Monitor on-prem, but if you have something in the cloud or you have something in a separate data center, the agent from ArcGIS Monitor can be installed in that environment and send that data back to your ArcGIS Monitor install. One of the things that I've run into in my past was issues with network noise. And it's something that, network managers or IT teams will be like, oh, we don't see any problem, but yet somebody will be like, oh, I can't do anything in enterprise. Can you figure out what's going on? And you go in and you look at enterprise and you see, for example, that a query that usually takes 2 seconds is taking 20. Monitor can help you figure out some of that information, and then you can send alerts and notifications and be able to use that information to help you debug that particular problem. And I know for me, that was always helpful because sometimes with a user base that I had in the past that was so large, there was no way I could go to each individual user and be like, is ArcGIS Enterprise working for you? It's just very difficult to do. So now if you look at this from a conceptual standpoint, this is your final deployment. And you see why Monitor is so important inside of all this. You can monitor your enterprise geodatabase, your data stores, or your server. Data store isn't technically available in Monitor right now, but it will be sometime. They're putting it in a product plan. But you can get to the data store through server to be able to monitor it. You've got your portal instance, so your web maps and everything else that goes with it. And then you can also manage the workflow manager and the image server. So you can kind of figure out where some of those bottlenecks are, where some of the pain points in your environment are, and then be able to work through those. One thing I think that's really important to understand about Monitor as well is that you can set the collections and of what you're getting information on and the notifications and alerts based on thresholds that work for your environment. There's some standards that are set up inside Monitor, but there are things that you can go in and customize for your environment. The other neat thing for Monitor, so you can actually check some of the information on it, is that you can basically create a hosted feature layer of your Monitor information and store it inside your Monitor database. And then once you do that, you can add that as an item to your portal and you can build dashboards off of it to check your system health. I think that is a great tool right there because, you could have a dashboard for your management team or whoever to be able to see how the system is performing. They don't have, and as an administrator, if you're the administrator, you also have that option to be able to just have one dashboard to look at instead of having to go through 1, 2, 3, 7, 8 servers. So that, it's a little bit easier to do that. So for the best practices, I've taken this a little bit different approach to it in that there's a lot of different best practices that we list on our website about the data, about how to manage the system. But I think the key points inside of this is, leveraging ArcGIS Online for public interface of applications, separate the workloads to maximize your system performance. I know obviously that's difficult at times, especially with cloud services because of cost, but we found that gives us the best overall system environment. If we can do that, it allows you to do some things like, inventory your environment, be able to figure out, how many times have you looked at your enterprise as an administrator and be like, how many hosted feature layers have test at the end of them? Help you clean up the system a little bit by doing some data governance and cleaning that out. The security of enterprise also helps because, if you have if you're following the best practices for setting up ArcGIS Enterprise, you're going to have it locked down and people aren't going to be able to just, find your URL and then go in and mess with any of your data. Obviously, I think that, ESRI tech support is, and this is not just as a new employee saying this and trying to have some of my colleagues be happy with it. I think ESRI tech support is fantastic. And all the time that I've been working with ESRI as a user and now as an employee, I've gotten a lot of satisfaction out of working with them and feeling like I'm getting the answers I need. So that's a big point. Leveraging ArcGIS Monitor for your system health is very important. And I think this last point on here about reevaluating your resources is also important. I mean, I've personally worked on environments, even in the last year, where the teams would change. People don't know who installed what, where, and why. And so you have to have that inventory to be able to understand that. And then also, well, what does that mean for the future? Are you upgrading along the course that we recommend? Can you upgrade along that course? Do you have specific tools that can't upgrade and why? What plan do you have to work with those tools to make them available? I know obviously in the server object extensions with ArcGIS Server, there's a lot of changes in there between versions 10.9.1 and 11. So that's something else to consider in what you're trying to do. This last piece about best practices is really more from my personal experience. So we document it, but this is really something that I find to be very helpful. Your backup and disaster recovery are a key success factor. Obviously, working with your IT folks to make sure that is going out the way that you need is important. WebGIS DR, the tool that we provide, is with your ArcGIS Enterprise. The important thing to understand about that is that you can run WebGIS DR. It'll back up your data store, your server, and your portal. But there's also other ways that you can automate the other systems that you're extending out there. You can use Python to export sites for image server and for workflow manager because it has the capability under the REST API to do that. So I'm, like I said earlier, a big believer in using automation. Obviously, you want to use your database servers backup capabilities to manage it, whether it's SQL Server and running SQL backups or Oracle, Postgres, whichever one it is, but they're going to be separate from your enterprise. So it's important to know that those things, once you run WebGIS DR, you're not getting image server and workflow manager or geo event server. You're just getting the base enterprise. So that's why it's good to know about the other parts of it. And this last bullet that I have here is more of a lesson learned. Your disaster recovery plan and backup strategy are only as good as your last successful backup and restore. If you're not testing your restore, then your backup plan doesn't really help. I mean, you can back up everything all day long, but if you can't restore it successfully, is your enterprise really working? Is it doing everything that you need to do? And that's important because, like, at AECOM, we had a 16 server deployment for production, and the base was 8 servers. The other 8 servers were notebook server, the image server, and monitor. And to be able to try to restore that system, took hours. And it was obviously any downtime was a big deal. So it's good to have that. Now, the other part that I didn't put in here, but is obviously is very important is if you can, I know sometimes it's tight budgets, so it's difficult to separate out workloads for dev and staging and testing and production, because sometimes you could get away with, you know, you take your production environment and you restore it to staging to test it. You know, so there's some other ways to do that. There's some tricks that you can do to manage your environment so that the URL that you're serving your enterprise and data from by using host files inside Windows systems, for example, to mimic your URL, and then you can restore from a WebGIS DR backup to the new system. All this WebGIS and ArcGIS stuff gets a little tongue-tied sometimes. But I think that's really important because people often, you know, I know I had the issue where I'd be calling support in a panic because the system was down, and I'd have to open up a premium support ticket to be able to get it back online again. Because even with all my experience and knowledge, I just couldn't figure it out. I needed somebody else to take a look at it. And that was really important. And the last slide I have on here, because I know it always helps, is I have a lot of different references for what we have out there, information that you can look at. There's a lot of trends that are going on. Some of my colleagues at ESRI do most of my colleagues at ESRI do a fantastic job of working through these different systems, helping to understand how ArcGIS is a system of systems and how you can better leverage it by extending those systems into your workflows and what works for your departments and your environment. So are there any questions? Yes, sir. So Monitor is a separate application, a separate environment. So our recommendation is to put Monitor on its own virtual machine, and then you install and configure it so that the Monitor database and the agent can be deployed. And the Monitor database is on the Monitor server, the web interface is on the Monitor server, but then the agent can be deployed to all of the components of your enterprise.
Straightforward.
Come on.
Yeah. Just repeat the question.
Oh, yes.
Any other example why staging is important, like from an upgrading perspective?
Yeah.
Why I would like to start?
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, the question about staging being important for an upgrade perspective. That's extremely important because you don't know. One of the things about upgrading enterprise is that when you're going through the process of upgrading your enterprise, the way we recommend working on it is that you take a WebGIS DR backup, you move that backup over to the environment that you're going to upgrade, you restore that backup. So you restore it to a staging environment, and then you have that, you have that staging environment running. You do some QA, QC on the data that's in the staging environment, make sure everything restored correctly, and then you can start the upgrade process. The other part of the upgrade process that's important to understand is that there's two parts to upgrading Portal and the ArcGIS data store. The first part is installing the software. The second part is upgrading Portal or the data store itself. That takes a little while depending on the size of your data. And this way you can have, excuse me, you can have your production environment still functioning. You can test that upgrade process, let the upgrade run, and then you can see what the upgrade is going to do. There are things in there, for example, like, changing of products, Dashboards Classic going away, some of the other products going away. Well, you need to understand what the effects of that are going to be on your production data. There is actually another article that's on the support site that talks about finding the dependencies for all of your data. And one of the things that I think is really important for that is that it helps you identify how all of your data is linked together. And then when you're doing that upgrade and you're finding some of these things that break, you have a way to check what is going on with those things and you can look back on them. Now, I will say that the mimicking of your URL is kind of important to that restore process as well, because that, deep embedded in some of this are some things that manage your environment based on that URL. Every item in portal has its own ID, and you want to make sure that those IDs are all reflected back in your new data and in the upgrade process. And then the upgrade itself gives you that opportunity to fix those things before you try to test it in production. You'll get a better estimate as to what it's going to take in production. Yes, sir.
So you had mentioned with editing data within the enterprise view database, we're coming from a long time direct database connection organization where we're trying to move everything into enterprise. And so lately we've been publishing feature layers to enterprise so that they can access them using Active Directory. But the process requires both editing on SVE and then running the synchronization to our warehouse after editing range. But is it best practice, like recommended by ESRI, for us to start migrating our direct database connections over to enterprise view database to do the editing directly into enterprise?
Yeah, so the question is about migrating enterprise geodatabases to your enterprise and where it's best to work on the editing. So I would say yes, that it is better to, so as the administrator and you have that direct connect, you can go into ArcGIS Server Manager and add that as one of your user managed data stores. And then once you do that, the assignment of the users to editing would be done through your portal. And by doing that, what you're doing is you're publishing by reference that data. And so that data is available to your portal, and then every user in your portal, if they're part of your editing work group, would be able to have access to it.
Still editing data on our
Yes. Yeah. The idea behind that is to cut out some of those extra steps that you have to do with if you're having to hand out credentials to every user that's going to connect in ArcGIS Pro so that they can go in and edit their data. Now what you're doing is you're referencing it inside your enterprise once and then assigning users to be able to use it. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? All right. Thank you.